opinions. I've heard people say that the Supreme Court creates law. They do not. They create opinions. It's up to us whether or not something is constitutional. And I was hoping Mike would still be here because one of the things I would love to see is him be our next governor. Yeah. Because there would be nothing more enthusiastic to people like me who review legislation than to see a veto session with Mike as governor.
Yeah.
That would be absolutely a hoot. One of the things we also do not realize, and I hear it all the time, is we are a democracy. We are not a democracy. We are a republic. One of the main differences between a republic and a democracy is that a republic, we the people control our government 365 days a year. In a democracy, you control it when you elect it. That's it. Other than that, the legislative body has control of it. This quote, for some reason, was attributed to Thomas Jefferson. I don't know why, but I researched it to figure out Thomas Jefferson didn't say it. We in America do not have a government by the majority. We have a government by the majority who participate. Yep. Local city council elections. If 100% of the people who were registered to vote would actually get out and vote,
Yeah.
you would have a completely different mindset of your city council. If 100% of the people who are registered to vote would get out and vote for their school board, we would have a completely different school board. The problem is, now I live in Springfield, home of MSU, Drury, and Evangel. 3 very liberal colleges. Now, I was born in Maryland. I was raised in Pennsylvania. I spent time in California, so when people told me when I was moving back to Missouri all the time that I loved it as conservative. Until I got here. And I had to go back and ask them what part is conservative. Because where I'm at in Willard at the time wasn't really conservative, and neither was Springfield. In 2008, I helped found a group that was called the Young Conservatives at the time. And the local talk show host on KSGF, a man by the name of Vincent David Jericho, wanted to create an organization that would define the term conservative nationwide. Slowly but surely, that organization evolved into what was called the Locke and Smith Foundation. As part of the Locke and Smith Foundation, I was appointed to head up the legislative committee because I was already attending city council meetings. Every other Monday, we had a little group. They called us the Same Tent People. We would get up and speak in front of city council about the things that they were doing incorrectly. Based on that knowledge, the legislative committee for the Locke and Smith Foundation was formed. I had about 50 people in this group, and I said, okay, what is the purpose of this group? Well, we're going to write legislation. Okay, great. Has anyone ever written a piece of legislation in this room? No. I never wrote a piece of legislation. So our idea was, in order to figure out how to write legislation, we had to read it. In order to figure out if it was correct, we had to read this document. I recommend everybody, even though you have them sitting back there, I recommend that everybody reach out to their state senator and their state representative and request them to send them a copy. And if enough people do it, they may go, why are all my constituents requesting a copy of the Missouri Constitution? Get them to thinking that you're going to start following them. Now, I'm thankful for Mike, because Mike is the recipient of 3 of the Locke and Smith Granite Plaques for being the most constitutionally voting member of our state assembly. Before him, I think he was fortunate because before him, he got to serve with a gentleman by the name of Nick Marshall, who was from basically North Kansas City. Nick, being an attorney, used to tear apart the Constitution and say, well, we can't do that because it says in here that we can't. I learned a lot from Nick because I would actually listen to his arguments from the floor, or I would send Elizabeth Peters, who was his legislative aide, I would send her a message to say, hey, why did Nick vote against this? Give me some knowledge. Because you know what? I'm the only one in my immediate family that does not have a college education. But I can read the Constitution. I read it daily. That is the only reason I can stand up here and quote certain parts of it verbatim. Article 321, Article 323 are the two most ignored sections of this document that we have. And I wanted to put Senate Bill 262 up here. Most of you know that was the fuel tax bill that was approved by our legislative body. That bill, when it was introduced, was about a fuel tax. So that's legit. The Constitution says our legislative body has the authority to tax us. The problem is before it even left the Senate, they amended the title to about transportation. Because they wanted to also put into this piece of legislation what is considered an electric vehicle task force. There is a provision in there also that if you as a commercial driver's license are convicted of human trafficking, that you would also lose your CDL. What does a CDL have to do with the fuel tax? Nothing. What does the fuel tax have to do with an electronic vehicle or electric vehicle task force? Nothing. We need 34 people on that Senate floor, well, 24 if you just count the Republicans, I think, that say, wait a minute, we can't do this. This morning I was in a meeting down here where they were doing legislative analysis, and they pulled up on the screen how many revised statutes of Missouri and all the different chapters and all the, I bet you if we stacked those books up, they'd probably be that tall. If we followed this book, they wouldn't be any bigger than this. It's so simple to follow this document. We have, for the last 10 years, as part of the Lock and Smith Foundation, we have been awarding the granite plaque. Nick Marshall's got 6. Mike, unbeknownst to him, will end up having 5.
Really?
Jim Lemke's got 1. And through the process of doing this, we have decided we're going to make it harder to get a granite plaque because there's too many people who are voting 30% constitutional. Yep. And they are the people who are the most constitutionally voting member of their legislative assembly. Wow. Last time I checked, 30% in any public schooling education was failing. Yep. So we've upped the criteria. You have to score at least 80% or better to get a granite plaque. I do know for a positive fact that Mike will achieve that 80%. I also know for a positive fact that he will be the only one, until I'm proven otherwise, who will achieve that 80%. It's too easy when you're up there to do what it is that the leadership tells you to do. It's too hard for somebody to say, no, I'm not going to do that because this document governs my daily life. I told my wife earlier, before I started driving up here, I think this summer I'm going to go to Arrowhead Stadium. I'm going to tell Andy Reid I'm the next quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. Well, what do I know about football? I never read the rule book. Matter of fact, I've never even seen the playbook. We have a playbook and a rule book right here. If your representative and your state senator have never read it, why did you put them in office? If your state representative has not followed this document, why do you want to make them a state senator? If your state senator has never read this document, why are you wanting to make them a U.S. congressman? I think in all sincerity, before we start putting people into office, an individual has to have some sort of street credibility before you give them the keys to the Ferrari. What have you done as an individual? And I like to now say prior to COVID, because I've seen a lot of people jump on the Liberty bandwagon during COVID. But what have you done prior to that would prove to me or show me that you have any concern about my life, my liberty, my pursuit of happiness, or the gains of my own industry, as it is clearly pointed out in Article 1, Section 2 of the Missouri Constitution? If you haven't done any of that, then why should I trust you up in Jefferson City to continue to do something that you say you're going to do that you probably won't? I don't even know if Mike ever even read a Constitution prior to him serving in office.
The U.S.
Huh?
The U.S.
U.S. He had all 6 pages in the back of this book. And I know I'm going to get a lot of disagreement on this, but in November we get to blow this puppy up. Within the confines of this Constitution, there is what is considered a constitutional convention. Every 20 years on the ballot, we get to say yay or nay to this document. If you've never opened it up, you'll find bingo. You'll find stem cell research in here. You'll find that the state grants you permission to get married. The state also grants you the permission to farm. Matter of fact, in Article 1, Section 23, if you have one of these documents, open it up. You'll be horrified to know that back in 2014, the people of the state of Missouri decided to tell the legislative body that you have the authority to write red flag laws. 2014 or 2016, one of the other.
2014.
And we are controlled by a conservative Republican. We have a supermajority of Republicans, even in 2016. How did we go from the right to keep and bear arms as a God-given right to then allowing the state legislative body to enact red flag laws? We did that. Well, I didn't vote for it, so I'm blaming somebody else. But in reality, that was put forth through the voter. It had to pass the legislative process first, and then the people voted on it. We have got to be more careful with what it is that we put in this document. Every word in this document goes back to this dictionary. And if you've never seen this, it is the 1755 Samuel Johnson's Dictionary. I recommend that you get one. You'll find that words that you thought you knew the meaning of don't mean what you think they mean. We've allowed the verbiage of our founding documents to get changed so they mean something that they no longer meant when they were written. Every time that we pass a constitutional amendment, we need to make sure that those amendments are written so we are not being in violation of the meanings in here. You also have the 1823 Webster's Dictionary, I think, or 29, something of that nature. So those are things that we need to pay attention to. Those are areas that we need to make sure that we don't violate another one's rights. Article 1, Section 23 is a classic example of the voters telling me or you that if a judge determines that you may be a detriment to society, that you're going to lose your God-given right to defend yourself. How I defend myself is my own business. It's not the government's business. I see people wearing T-shirts that say, my right to carry is the Second Amendment. It is not. Your right to free speech is not the First Amendment. You have the right to speak, assemble, associate with or without government permission. We need to start using the language that we're supposed to be using. Stop saying that a judge ruled. Courts do not rule. Courts do not create law. They opine. And before you repeat something that, hey, the judges did this, go read the opinion for yourself. One of the things that I have noticed since belonging to this group in Oklahoma is they have this process set up, and if any of you are aware of Ron Calzone, you know, he really likes to go and sue the state legislative body for being in violation of the Missouri Constitution. There's like 20 Ron Calzones in Oklahoma. And then underneath those 20 Ron Calzones, I think there's like 30 to 40 people who are considered what's litigate review. And then there's like another 30 or 40 people underneath them that all they do, I call them policy wonks. Because I belong to a committee here in Springfield that does the same thing. We read every single piece of legislation that has been passed either in the House or in the Senate. And our number one question is, where did you get the authority to pass that within the confines of this document? If it's not there, it should have never been passed. So if you vote generally the correct way, you end up where Mike's at, in the broom closet. If you vote the way that the party wants you to vote, then you can pretty much do anything you want to do. So in Oklahoma, these policy wonks, they review legislation, and they pass it to the litigant group, and they say, hey, by the way, this House Bill 1340, it violates this area and this area and this area of the state constitution. Then it comes up to the group that I belong to, which is right now the litigant group. We have to read court opinions based on the sections of the Constitution that are being in violation of. And there are times where I am reading court opinions and I have to ask myself, was the judge even present the day that the case was even argued on the floor? Because the opinion that was written has nothing to do with the reason why the lawsuit was brought. And what ends up happening is that judge's opinion, according to most, becomes law, even though it had nothing to do with the original case to begin with. You see it at the Supreme Court level, too. There's all kinds of opinions that have been written that have nothing to do with the reason the case was actually brought to court. And if we continue to use their verbiage, they create law, we have to follow those dictates. Now, that group in Oklahoma has told me at some point in time, I'll get to argue a case in front of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And I jokingly laugh and say that will never happen. Either you need a lot of bail money, or I'm going to be in contempt of court within the first 5 minutes. I don't need a judge telling me what my rights are. I don't need a constitution telling me what my rights are. I know what they are. And as soon as you violate them, then you are in violation of what I hold dearest to my heart. Mike goes out of his way to educate people. I've seen his YouTube videos. I've seen him stand up on the floor. I've seen him cook in overalls, for Pete's sake. But those are things that without that education, without that knowledge, without that without the availability to being able to educate others, we're lost. I know for positive fact he has attended at least 2, maybe 3 of the Constitution classes that we have given. I have reached out to many people and said, look, if you have problems with or want to know more about the Constitution, let me know. Jan is a classic example. She'll say, hey, where can I find, or can you answer this question? Well, I won't answer it. I'll tell her where she can start looking. Because if I give you the answer, it's not going to help. If I force you to look for the answer, it's a whole lot better off. And that's not something that we're comfortable with. That's not something that we like doing. A buddy of mine has always told me, Tom, in order to figure out where it is that you come from, you got to go back to the beginning. And I never understood it. And one day I asked him, I said, what do you mean by that? And we were fighting an ordinance in Springfield. Restaurant health inspections. And he said, well, how did that become mandatory? I said, well, I don't know. It had to be legislatively. So when we went back and looked, where we found the health safety inspection had nothing to do with health safety inspections. It had everything to do with fire sprinkler inspections in Kansas City. Somehow an opinion of a judge deemed that fire sprinkler inspections opened up the marketplace to political subdivisions to start charging for restaurants to go through health safety inspections on their food. That was not the intent of the law. I tried to get a group of restaurant owners in Springfield to file suit. Good luck. Because none of them would stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, I'm going to challenge it. And you may ask me, why didn't I challenge it? Well, I don't own a restaurant. The court is going to determine that I don't have standing simply because I eat at a restaurant. Does not make it so that I can challenge anything in court. Several years ago, the cameras for the red lights was challenged in Springfield. It was a former Missouri Highway patrolman who blew through a red light who challenged it. In order for him to challenge it, he had to blow through the red light. And a part of the problem is the ticket was generated not by PD, but by some company down in Florida. And you didn't get to challenge it in court. You went through some sort of made up, I don't know what the word was that they used, but you didn't. It was not a legal system that you got to challenge it through. It was like some sort of arbitrator. And basically they would say, well, were you driving the car? Well, no. Well, then who was? We'll issue them the ticket. That's not the way our system of government works. So they got thrown out. Sometimes you have to do what's uncomfortable to make it so that you can correct something that you're uncomfortable with. I'm fighting the city of Springfield right now, and I don't know if you'll know what I'm talking about, but there's this plant that's native in Missouri called poke salad. I let it grow in my backyard. Well, the city of Springfield has an ordinance that once poke salad berries, it's illegal. Okay, I wasn't even familiar with. I thought this thing was a tree when it started growing up on my backyard. So as it grows, it has these beautiful leaves on it, and it has this purple stem, and I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And then next thing I know, it gets these little berries on it. And not only did I have one, I had like 50 of these things in the backyard because I didn't want an acre piece of land. And I get a thing in my front yard that tells me that I have to get rid of the poke salad that's growing in my backyard. I don't know what poke salad is. So while I'm at work, the city of Springfield comes onto my property with weed whackers, 3 dudes, and they completely obliterate my backyard, including all my poke salad, and give me a $375 work order for the privilege of them coming out and destroying my poke salad. That's when I learned what poke salad was, because it was out in my backyard in nice little mounds. So that got me to thinking, well, wait a minute, what does the state of Missouri say? Well, the state of Missouri says that anything that's native in the state of Missouri is allowed to be grown in the state of Missouri. What they're trying to do, I believe, is trying to get rid of people from planting what's called invasive plants and going back to native plants. Well, I never planted the poke salad, so I just didn't pay the ticket. Well, guess what happens when you don't pay something that the government says you owe? I'm well over $1,000 now in citations and fines for this poke salad. But I have state law on my side. I have the Missouri Department of Natural Resources on my side. I also have another branch of government in the state of Missouri, which I forget which one it is, that tells me, no, you don't have to get rid of this poke salad, no matter what it does. So Springfield and I keep going back and forth into court. I figure I'll sell my house eventually. They'll take their fine out of the sale price of my house, and I'll still be no closer to litigating this case than I am now, because we're on delay. I can't get into court to fight this ticket. I have standing. I have the bill. I have pictures of my backyard and what it looked like, courtesy of the city of Springfield. And then I have pictures of the mound of poke salad that they left me. I have state law on my side. This should be a easy case to figure out. But as long as the city of Springfield keeps delaying and delaying and delaying and delaying, the cost of my ticket keeps going up and up and up and up. Which means Thomas is getting madder and madder and madder. And occasionally the wife has to tell me, no, you cannot go downtown. I'll do that. Because she knows where I'll go. And it's not going to be pretty when she has to come out and bail me out. Because I don't tolerate those things that way. I used to tell people when I gave these classes, when I could get the stupid thing to function on the computer, if I don't piss you off by the time that this class is due, I didn't do my job properly. Because you know what? I used to be ignorant of this document. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I graduated from high school from Pennsylvania. You know what I didn't know? I didn't know the state of Pennsylvania had a state constitution. Now that's twofold. One, the education system never bothered to tell me there was one. Because I can remember what I learned about the United States Constitution and what I learned about the U.S. Constitution when I was in high school had nothing to do with the United States Constitution.
They teach nothing.
Because government was the grantor of everything that I was allowed to do. I can remember that verbatim. Your rights come from God. Now, I do believe there is such a thing called a constitutional right. A constitutional right, in my opinion, is a right that requires society to exist in order for you to have it. Due process is one. Voting is another. You know what I don't need society for? I don't need society to ask the woman that I love to marry her. Unless you go to Article 1, Section 35 of the Missouri Constitution, and then I need permission. There is a court case, or actually I'm waiting for. Last time I gave a Constitution class in Cape Girardeau, I like to jokingly tell the class that, you know, there is an amendment in the Missouri Constitution that's specific to women. Article 1, Section 22B.
Yes.
Ladies, do you know that you are exempt from jury duty?
Jury duty, just because you're female.
There was a lady who used that when she went down to get selected for jury duty. And the person who was chosen said, well, the Supreme Court ruled that that's no longer allowed.
It's in the Constitution.
So when she got back with me, now she was allowed to exempt herself that go round. When she got back to me, I says, now what I'd like for you to do is to ask that county what Supreme Court opinion was written that violates the Missouri Constitution. Because I want to know what it is. Because unbeknownst to a lot of people, you know, there is a website that is specific to every single Supreme Court opinion from the very beginning to now that you can go read. And I've read them all. And I can't find any basis in any Supreme Court opinion that specifically states that Article 1, and I do mean specifically state, that Article 1, Section 22B of the Missouri Constitution is unconstitutional. Because you know what? We put that in law. The people did. So if the people put something into law, how can it be unconstitutional? Now, Mike brought up a good point earlier. Equal application. Men, do we get exempted from jury duty? I understand why it is that women get exempted. There are certain things that women, real women, have that men don't. I don't have those issues, and I will never have those issues. So I can understand why women are exempted from jury duty. Also, the Constitution was written in a time frame where the women stayed home and raised the children. It would be hard for you to serve on a jury and raise your children and cook for your husband and mow the lawn or plow the field or whatever it is that you were doing back in that time frame and serve on jury duty. It makes perfect sense. But it violates Article 1, Section 2 of the Missouri Constitution. Just like Article 1, Section 23 of the Missouri Constitution violates other sections of the Missouri Constitution. And I've had people tell me, well, Tom, depending on what we put in the Constitution last, that's what we have to adhere to. So I can put something in the Constitution, you can put something in the Constitution that violates other sections of the Constitution, and we're good with that, simply because that's the last thing that was put into it. I don't think that's the way that works. But we don't know that because we keep saying that we have constitutional rights. And if I offend anybody at this point, if I hear Josh Hawley say one more time that we need to defend a democracy, I'm going to smack him in the back of the head. There is nothing more irritating to me. I mean, for the majority party in this state is Republican, not Democratic Party. If you don't know the difference, why are you in Congress? I expect Joe Biden to say that we need to defend a democracy. I've never had a Democrat come to my front door ever and tell me they're going to make sure that my rights are not violated. I've had plenty of Republicans do that. Now, I am neither a Republican nor am I Democrat. I am an equal opportunity offender. When we do our point scores for the Locke Smith Foundation, you will find that there are Democrats at the top of the point score. Now, to this day, not a single Democrat has won a granite plaque. And I don't like to call it winning because in reality you didn't win anything. You did by your voting record and adhere to your oath. So you are being presented a granite plaque. But Democrats end up at the top of the point scores. And what I'll hear all the time is, Well, that's just because they're voting against Republican legislation. Well, that's not factually accurate, because if that's the case, then all the Republicans should be down below them, and that's not the way it works. I think there were 2 bills this year that were actually sponsored by Democrats. One is the bill that Mike was talking about, the FIFA, whatever it is. And the other one was we're going to designate the third week of September as Black University College.
718.
Senate
Senate Bill 718, Washington.
So in reality, most of the time when you see these scorecards going around that proclaim that somebody is a rhino, guess whose legislation they're voting on? They're voting on Republican legislation. Democrats can't get a thing done in this state. Democrats can't even get a bill through the committee, for Pete's sakes. That requires the other side of the aisle to do it for them. So 99.9999999% of all legislation passed in the past 8 years has been written, sponsored, and promoted by the Republican Party. So I hate it when people tell me, well, we got to put more conservatives in office. Define that for me, please. I jokingly call Mike the rhino. He is the Republican in name only, because the majority of the party is not constitutional. I've had people tell me, well, Tom, we can't figure out what the Missouri Constitution says, because you know what? It takes a judge to tell us whether or not it's constitutional. I guarantee you that if you open this book and start reading it daily, you'll go, you know, this is so easy. How come they can't do it? They're not going to do it until you hold them accountable. And that's at every level of government. Start out at your school board. Start out at your city council meetings. Make it so that these people have to read the rule book prior to them playing the game. I've got a customer, I build water treatment equipment, and I've been visiting this customer for the last 8 years. And he has this absolutely beautiful chessboard. It's done up to the motif of like 1776 American Revolution. So you got British, you got American soldiers. He asked me one day when I was admiring, he said, Tom, do you play chess? Oh, absolutely I do. He said, let's sit down and play the game. So about my move 8, his pawn takes my bishop. And I've been watching enough people play chess that I kind of follow the way they were going because I was setting him up. Well, in move 10, 11, something like that, his bishop, or actually his pawn, shoots across 6 spaces diagonally and captures my queen. Now you're all sitting there going, well, pawns can't do that. Well, that's what I said too.
Yes, they can.
Well, we're playing by my rules. He said, I was taught as a child that if your pawn captures a different piece, they acquire all those powers. So when his pawn captured my bishop, all of a sudden his pawn can now move as many spaces diagonally as he can muster and either take a piece or he gets to the end of the board. Never play a game that you do not know the rules to. And that's exactly what we do when we elect people to go to Washington, D.C. or to Jefferson City. If you haven't read that rule book, don't put your name on the ballot. If you've never even read a Constitution, please don't tell me you're a constitutional conservative. It's that time of the year now where I like to hop on my bike and I go out to these little towns that have these people with their little tents up that they're running for state rep and they're running for. And my wife, when I first started riding bike, got me this U.S. Constitution shirt that has a preamble on the front and the back, and it's got the red, white, and blue flag. I'll go out to like Ash Grove or Fair Grove, and you guys may not know where those are at, but those are little towns outside of Springfield. And I'll end up going up there, and there'll be some wannabe state rep or wannabe state senator. Oh man, I love your shirt. I'm a constitutional conservative. Well, let's see, I've got 10 years of that document embedded in my head. Have you read the state constitution? Huh? Well, you're running to be a state representative, are you not? Yeah. Which constitution do you love? Oh, I'm all about the Second Amendment. That's not in the state constitution. It's Article 1, Section 23. And they look at you like, what? Article 1, Section 23. That's the section in the Missouri Constitution that is enumerated to secure my right to defend my family with no matter what it is that I decide to defend it with. Because you know, a firearm back in the day was also not only a firearm, but it was also a machete. It was any weapon that you could literally choose at that point in time. I often wonder what would happen if somebody dressed all in black with Chinese stars down the front of them, big old machetes hanging off their back, and walked into a Walmart in Springfield. Because I know what happens when somebody walks into a Walmart with an AR-15. The most conservative judge in the area confiscates his firearms. And for what? Was he in violation of the law? No. Was he exercising his rights? Yep. You may not have liked the way he was carrying his firearm, and I always love these arguments between the right and the left. And I even do it with McCloskeys out here. Because I look at that picture, and as a person who grew up around firearms, I'm going, you know, maybe they ought to take some firearm safety courses. But you know what? It's their right to own a firearm. It was their right to secure their property. It was their right because somebody was trespassing on their property. The fact that it went to court infuriates me. It should have never went that far. Right. The fact that they allowed their guns to be confiscated also infuriates me. I'm not an attorney, so I would expect me to go, yeah, you can have them. Bullets first. I would not expect somebody who practices law in the state of Missouri just to hand them over. I don't mean to pick on them or Mark because he's running for office. But if you're the person who's supposed to defend and secure your rights, why are you giving them up? And that's what they did. And granted, no one else in that whole neighborhood, and I've never been there, so I don't know if there's other houses in there or not. I'm going to assume that there are. Not one single person stood up in defense of them. Nobody went to court with them. Now, granted, you can say, well, it's St. Louis, it's a heavy Democrat area. Well, last time I looked at the St. Louis ballot, I don't remember too many Republicans being on it. I don't remember too many Constitution Party people being on it. I don't even remember any Libertarian Party people being on it. We've got to get to the point where and I heard something about foxholes earlier. I drilled holes out of the foundation of my house, about yay big and round, when I first bought it. My wife thought I was nuts. She said, what are you drilling holes in the foundation of the house for? Shooting lanes. Because when you hear the time when some nutcase in North Springfield went nuts, I guarantee you it's going to be me. Because I've had it with people explaining to me what I can and cannot do and using the government to force me to do it. So if you would like to contribute to my bail fund, I'll start a GoFundMe.
Go send
I've
me.
also had a request, and the I know people don't like to read the Constitution. It's too boring, it's too laborious, and you don't have time to do it. So the We the People group, peoples in Cape Girardeau, have asked, and I have submitted to, I'm going to do a podcast. It's called State Constitutions. I've already created it. I just don't have anything up on it yet. But I'm going to read the Missouri State Constitution verbatim in a podcast. Because listening to podcasts with as much as I drive is the greatest thing in the world. You know, I have found the Anti-Federalist Papers. I have found the Federalist Papers. I have found this one that absolutely terrifies me called wrongful convictions. I've always had this thought process, someday I'm going to end up in jail for something I didn't do. That's what wrongful convictions is. And the more I listen to that show, the more scared that I get of how easy it is that people have been railroaded and put in jail. Ever hear the statement, we are a nation of laws? Do you know that's half a statement? The other half that no one says is, as long as those laws are used to secure your right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and the gains of your own industry, there should be no law written that does not secure my rights. That's all they're for. And how do I know that? Mike knows it really well, because Article 1, Section 2 says it. 34 senators and 163 state representatives introduce a bill that we're going to make the ice cream cone the official dessert of Missouri. We're going to make the Kansas City Chiefs the official football team of the state of Missouri. I have yet to see the bill that introduced to say that they're going to make the St. Louis Cardinals the official baseball team of Missouri, because I know the other side of the state is not going to be too appreciative of it. We've got bills introduced 4,000 just on the House side, just this session. Close to 1,300 on the Senate side. How many senators are there?
34.
What's 34 divided by 13, or 1,300 divided by 34? Apparently they don't have enough to do. We got 163 state reps that introduced over 4,000 pieces of legislation. I saw a bill recently that we were reviewing it, and the whole entire bill, it was like 5 pages, and all it was doing was getting rid of a complete section of revised statute. Until it got to committee. And all of a sudden, a 7-page bill went over 80 some odd pages, because it was no longer about removing stuff from law, it was about adding and adding and adding and adding and adding and adding. And what they also like to do, I haven't figured this out, is they like to change the verbiage in existing legislation in hopes that it actually changes the meaning of the legislation. And if you've never read a bill, I recommend you do this next year. Take a bill, and I'm going to make it specific to Republicans, because those are the only ones that are going to go somewhere. Take one bill and follow it from the time it's introduced, first read, second read, committee to the floor, third read and passed, it gets over to the other side, and follow that entire bill and see if you can keep up with that. Because you know what? I feel sorry for the people who are elected. I feel sorry for that gentleman that I was sitting back there with at the table who wants to be a state senator. That man does not know what he's getting himself into. Oh, okay, right there it is. Because I think, in all sincerity, before any bill is introduced, it ought to be read in its entirety. Not, oh, by the way, House Bill number 32 is first read and it's introduced as a bill about elections. No, Read the entire piece of legislation. That's how it gets introduced. Original titling. Our representatives like to think that partway through the system, they can amend the title and say, oh, by the way, since we voted on it, that's the original title. And where do they get this ideology from? Well, you have an original birth certificate, do you not? If you were adopted, you've got two. You've got the original, which is under lock and key, and you can't get to, and then you've got the second original that the courts say that you have. That's not the way the system works. When that bill is first read, it has a title. Then they go home for the evening. They come back the following day. There's this thing called a journal. And before business even starts, they approve the prior day's work. What's the original title of the bill? When it was first read. I've seen Mike do it countless times. Wait a minute. We amended this. We can't do this. We need 34 Mike Booms.
Amen.
We need 1,500 Ron Calzones. If we're going to amend the state constitution, I want Ron Calzone to be there to do it. I don't want somebody who, and here's what scares me about a constitutional convention on the federal side. You're no longer in the Senate. So we've got 34 individuals who don't follow the Constitution, along with 163 possible individuals who don't follow the Constitution on the state side. They're going to choose who the delegates are who get to go back to Washington, D.C. to amend the U.S. Constitution. Is that what you want?
No.
Because you know what scares me? The Democrats are awful quiet about this constitutional convention thing.
Yeah.
They haven't said a word. So as long as you don't say anything, at a later date you just come in and you sweep yourself into it, and next thing you know, you've got 35 AOCs on a constitutional convention floor determining what your new amendments are going to be. Think about what it is that you do. Think about what it is that you ask for. And before I leave, I have to admit that I did ask Mike to do something unconstitutional. And I have to admit that Mike did do what I asked him to do that was unconstitutional. He didn't do it in the way that I asked, but he did do it. I asked for, in the month of January, a Missouri Constitution Day. He gave it to me. Well, he gave me Constitution Day. He didn't give me Missouri Constitution Day. Just like when the Lockett Smith Foundation was rolling. I said, I want a Lockett Smith Foundation license plate. Now, we would say it was unconstitutional, but by God, I would have bought one. I'll celebrate Missouri Constitution Day, although I know it was unconstitutional. And I think the people who are elected now, if they take the opportunity, should go into the schools. Because they have the availability of going into the schools without being questioned, and start opening up that blue document and reading to the pupils who are sitting in that school what it is that document says and what it means, and instead of allowing people to do it that have never read it.